my name is Paul, and I am a nerd, and you are not, and that's why you're here. Okay, maybe you are a nerd, but you are here for the Tabs3 Virtual User Group presented by Attorney Computer Systems, and this is January of 2015, meaning that those people that are here have survived yet another year end. Of course, if you have our new general ledger system, version 17 of the general ledger system, you don't have to close the year anymore, so one less thing to do. But enough about me, let's talk about you. You are here to learn about Tabs3 and its accounting software, and I'm here to tell you about it, along with Mary Jo and Leanne. But first, a little bit of housekeeping. I'm going to show you this screen here and talk about it. This is our GoToWebinar control panel. If you are still looking at this, it's because you have not pressed the button that looks like this, the arrow pointing to the right, because pressing this button will cause this thing to slide off the right-hand side of your screen. You would want to do that if it is covering up my screen so that you can be sure to see everything it is that me and Mary Jo are going to show you today. If you do click that button, you'll notice that once this slides off the screen, this button turns instead into an arrow pointing to the left. And clicking it again when it's in that state will cause this to slide back onto your screen. Why would you want it to slide back onto your screen? Because you want to type a question, and if you do, you want to type it down here. Typing a question down here, and of course remembering to hit send, will prompt our humble yet south of the border moderator, Leanne. I guess we're all south of the border today. Yes, we did eat Mexican food for lunch. Be glad you're not here with us. Our humble moderator, Leanne, will recognize that you have a question. She will interrupt Mary Jo or myself at the opportune moment. She will interpret your question for you and present it to us, where we will attempt to answer it. I say attempt because, A, I have the gift that my mother had of being able to start telling an answer or a story or talking about something and go off on 17 tangents before I'm done and not answering the question. Or sometimes we just don't answer the right question. So if we go off on tangents, or you have follow-up questions, or we answer the wrong question and don't quite answer the one you want to ask, just keep typing your questions here, your follow-up questions. Just keep remembering to hit send. Then Leanne will keep interrupting us at the opportune time to continue asking your questions on your behalf. Now, if that sounds like a lot of typing, you can also press this button here that looks like a hand with an arrow pointing upwards in front of it. That means raise your hand. Same thing will happen. Leanne will recognize that you have a question. She will interrupt Mary Jo or myself at the opportune time. But instead of reading your question, she will unmute your microphone. So we have the no Fritos, no Doritos rule. Odd that we'd have a no Doritos rule when we're all south of the border, but we won't go there. No munching, no eating, because your mic will remain unmuted until we are done answering your question. So at that point, you're in a one-on-one sort of conversation with whoever's answering. And you can interrupt and ask follow-up questions. You can make sure we stay on track, all by simply talking. When you're done, Leanne will mute you back up, and you will then be in a Frito Dorito enabled zone. So without any further ado, well, what are we talking about, Mary Jo? We are talking about, I'm glad I looked at my list here. We're going to start reminding you 2 times for every virtual user group meeting that version 15, if you still have version 15, and how do you tell that? You go into Help in any program and click on About, and it'll tell you what version you have. If you still have version 15, it is being sunsetted in June or July of this year. What does that mean? It means you won't be able to get support anymore. It means that at some point you won't be able to update your data without sending it to STI. It means we won't be able to get support on your behalf. It means you won't get the updates anymore until you get updated to the current version. So be sure if you have version 15 or lower that you get up to the latest version, because version 15 itself is going off maintenance and being sunsetted in the middle of the year. And so now I will tell you that Mary Jo is going to, in a minute, tell us all about the inactivity report. She's continuing her run through all the possible reports in Tabs3, and we're going to do the same thing in Practice Master. And so she's going to talk about something called the inactivity report, brand new in, I believe, version 17. Maybe it was 16, but it hasn't been there very long. Very, very useful report. And I'm going to talk about renumbering all sorts of things. So without any further ado, I am going to press a few magic buttons, that one and this one, And no, don't save that. And I'm going to go back over here, and I'm going to turn it over to Mary Jo, who's going to talk about the inactivity report.
Okay. So continuing on our report series, today he said the inactivity report. Sometimes we want to know what cases we have not touched in a while. We don't want cases to fall through the cracks, and there might be a case that we haven't done any fees on in a while. Maybe we haven't prepared a statement. Maybe we want to see, just whatever those last few things are that we've done. And we want to know this within a certain time frame. Do we want to see all the clients that have not had anything done to them in the last 30 days, or maybe the last 3 months, or 2 months, or a year? There is a report in Tabs that can show us that information. So we're going to explore that a little bit today. So I'm going to go out to the Report tab. And I'm just delayed here, but I've got control at least. And it's underneath our client reports. So I'm going to go in there. And here is our client inactivity report. So let's get in here and take a look around. So first off, we've got our very first screen that looks like all of our other reports. So we may want to, and in this case, it's automatically defaulting to a specific status. And the reason that we want to do this is we don't want to look at cases that have already been marked inactive. We only want to look at active cases that hasn't had any activity in a certain amount of time. Now, that would be the standard, but there might be an instance where you might want to include inactive cases because you want to follow up and see when the last, when was the last payment that came in. Because remember, we can still take payments on inactive cases. So this is set automatically to be active, but you may want to change it to something else. So this is where you would do that if you're not getting the results that you think that you should. The other thing is the open and close dates. It's defaulting to having a specific open and close date. Here we're saying that the open date is just wide open, but we do want to include clients without a close date. And you've got these other parameters, just like in all the other reports, and we've done a webinar on this in the past that talks about all these general parameters that you can set and have. So just keep in mind that these two are preset, and you might need to change them depending on the results that you want. On the Options tab, this is where we're going to say that we want activity within a certain time frame, or no activity, I'm sorry, within a certain time frame. Now, you have to remember we are in sample data, so we've got some old dates here, but I am going to just leave them out there. Our system thinks it's in November, so this is, a little different than what you will see. But it will actually, if I change this and I say weeks instead of days, you'll see that the dates will also change here and tell me the dates that I'm going to get the no activity for. So keep this in mind. You will be able to see those dates. Ours is kind of a little funky because of the sample data, but you can change and see what results it will give you. Next is the items that we want to search. You can do all of them, a combination, one, whatever it is that you want to see. So if I want to see any clients that I have not put any fees in the last 5 days, or I want to see any clients that don't have any costs in the last 5 days. Now, 5 days is a little extreme maybe. I don't know that you want to go that tight. You probably are looking at things that maybe haven't happened in a couple months, or maybe it's 30 days or something like that. So just keep in mind the parameters and what you want to search. When was the last statement? Oh, I want to see the clients that have not had a statement sent out to them in the last 6 months, or whatever it would be. Same thing with payments. I want to see all the clients that have not made a payment in the last whatever date. Payment adjustments, write-offs, and client funds are also available in this criteria. We can choose our orientation and print a criteria page, just like in all of our other reports. The criteria page is just going to be a page that's going to show you all of the selections that you've made. So if you want to run this again later and you haven't saved your parameter, you can then use that as your cheat sheet to put in the same things that you did before. Lastly, we have our Sort tab, and we have a few more options here on our Sort tab than we normally do. We have our primary order, which you'll see on this side has client ID, client name, primary, secondary, originating, and category. And our secondary order also has the last activity date added in here. So you've got two different sort options, your primary and your secondary. And then remember, you can also start each sort on a new page. So I'm not going to do that because I don't have that many, and I just want to combine them up onto one page. I could do this by client name search, so they're alphabetical, or just by their client ID number, or by primary timekeeper, or any of these other options. So let's run this. I've just got it out here for 5 days. And we're going to say OK and preview. And what we get is this nice little list of clients. And I've got it by timekeeper, so it's breaking it down. And I did not say to put them on a new page, but you could if you're going to hand these out to your timekeepers. But here I've got, these clients that have not had any activity in that 5-day period. And it will also tell you the last date that they did have activity. So I can see Peterson Insurance has not had an expense put in since 11/13, or administrative account was opened on here, or this last activity for Sarah McCoy was a fee on 11/17, or here's a statement that was put out for Marcus Phillips, and so on. So you've got this criteria date here, and then what actually was the last activity that happened. So you can go back and find out how old these clients are that you haven't had any contact or activity with, and then you can reach out and you can make sure that those cases don't fall through the cracks. So it's a great report. It's nice and handy to get that information. A lot of times attorneys and timekeepers want to know when was the last time so-and-so did this or that, and this is a great way that you can come in and you can do that. And again, you can specify how long or how far back you want to go. Paul?
That's a great report. I remember when this was released how excited people were about being able to do that, because that is what happens. A lot of times you'll forget about a matter, you won't bill it, you won't have any fees, and kind of out of sight, out of mind, and here's a way to get to that. Now, I'm going to talk about something totally different. I'm going to change gears. I'm going to talk about renumbering. Renumbering for a lot of different reasons. Now, the most common reason to renumber, as you know, if you're using Tabs, you know that you bought a certain quote-unquote timekeeper limit. And so let's say that you have a 19 timekeeper version. Maybe you only have 12 timekeepers, but perhaps you've got some old timekeepers in the system that are taking up those extra numbers, and you've never done anything with them, and you really don't want to do anything with them. You want that historical time. And now you've got a new timekeeper coming into the firm, a new attorney, a new paralegal, and you don't have room for them. Well, one of the things you can do is renumber the timekeeper. So I'm going to go into maintenance and renumber, and I'm in tabs, so I have the ability to renumber clients, categories, transaction codes, and timekeepers. More on this in a second. So I'm going to go into renumber timekeeper. And what you would do, this is kind of a special type of renumbering, so I'm going to explain it first, is you would perhaps rename timekeeper number 19, if you had a 19 timekeeper limit perhaps, to old timekeepers. In some firms, if I was in the firm and I was a partner, I'd object, so maybe you want to call it former timekeepers.
And one thing, Paul, just before, when you say that, make sure that number 19 is not a timekeeper that is going to remain live.
Exactly.
Because if you rename a live timekeeper, you're going to lose that.
Well, you're not losing anything. You're
renaming them.
And then once you do what I'm about to show you, you'd really be in trouble. So yes, good point. Thank you, Mary Jo. Make sure that the number that you choose to roll these old timekeepers or former timekeepers into is available. Is probably one of those former timekeepers. And so you take, then, once you've decided that it's going to be 19, and you've got 17 is also one that's not being used, all you would do is say, I want to take number 17 and roll it into number 19. Now, I don't have that many in my sample system, so I'm going to pretend that I'm rolling 1 into 2. Now, overwrite, this is very important. You do not want to overwrite when you change timekeeper numbers, when you renumber a timekeeper. You still want all the time that's there from 19, you still want all the time that's there from 17 put into 19, so you're kind of combining them and you are not overwriting. Okay, overwriting would take all the time from 17, put it in 19, and get rid of all the time that's there for 19, and you do not want that. The reason you're renumbering timekeepers is you need the room, but you still want that old detail. Maybe you don't care that you know that this time was for Bob Smith, who's been gone for 5 years, and this time was for Sally Jones, who's been gone for 17 years. You just care about the fact that it's time that was billed at a certain rate, at a certain amount, at a certain number of hours. Okay? So that's really all there is to it. Renumbering timekeepers, simply a matter of specifying the old number, the new number, and in this unique instance of timekeepers, you get to choose whether or not you overwrite. You can do more than one at a time. So if we really weren't renumbering everybody into 2, I could do something like this. And the only reason I'm doing 1, 3, 4, and 5 is because I have a 5 timekeeper limit on my sample data. So if we theoretically wanted to renumber all 4 of those timekeepers, 1, 3, 4, and 5, into timekeeper number 2, thereby kind of pulling them all together, this is how we would do it all in one fell swoop. Now, you're not going to take all your timekeepers and merge them into one, only the former ones, okay? So this is a very important use of this renumbering capability, but there are other reasons to do it. So I'm going to cancel out of here. You could have just numbered a category wrong. Perhaps you decided you wanted all your categories relating to insurance defense to be numbers 1 through 50. And so you created a whole bunch of different categories relating to insurance defense because that's the primary focus of your firm. And then you started with 51 and you put in, you have a little bit of estate planning work, you have a little bit of, probate work, you have a little bit of whatever work. And so you started numbering those with 51. Well, if your primary focus of it is insurance defense, you might have a lot of insurance defense related categories, and so at some point you might use up all 50, and you may want to renumber 51 and 52 and 53 to create some more room. So you can renumber categories exactly the same way, and yes, you do always want to back up your data. Same thing, you can do more than one at a time. So if we wanted to take 51 and make it 71, and 52 and make it 72, and 53 and make it 73, we could do that all at the same time.
Paul, I'm just going to interject another reason that you might want to do that with those categories is if you want to delete any categories. So you cannot delete a category if it's been assigned to a matter. So you may want to eliminate insurance defense and move it into somebody else that maybe created one that was insurance DEF, or you want insurance DEF to go into insurance defense. So that's another reason you could renumber them into that, and then you could delete that old one. So
right,
just another
this doesn't just change the number in the category. It changes all the existing cases that are assigned to that category to the new category. Just like it changed all the fee and related information for the old timekeeper from 17 to 19 in my example. Leanne tells me that there might be a question. Leanne?
Yes, the question is when I renumber a timekeeper into a different timekeeper and I wanted to run a timekeeper report, would it bring up the fees billed for the former timekeeper?
They would all be combined into the new timekeeper. So if you take 17 and renumber them into 19, and then you run any report that lists numbers by timekeeper, everything for that 17 has now been combined into that 19. So you do, I should emphasize, you do lose the ability to distinguish between the two timekeepers, but you don't lose the data. They get combined into that new number.
You answered the question. Thanks.
Awesome. Okay. Now, a couple other things. You can renumber transaction code. Same thing. Somebody created, Mary Jo's example applies here too. Somebody created color copies and somebody else created color space copies. I don't know, whatever. Or maybe they spelled color like they do in England. Nonetheless, same thing. You can renumber a category, a transaction code, and just like the categories that were assigned to that, cases that were assigned to that category, the transactions that were assigned to that old code will now be combined.
I'm sorry, Paul, but there's another reason that you could want to renumber a T code.
This is why we let Mary Jo go out to lunch with us when we go south of the border. Mary Jo?
Well, another reason to renumber transaction codes is the first transaction code of every single type is the default. So number 1 is always the default fee entry. Number, whatever it is, your first expense, T code would be your first payments. Maybe you have number 900 as your default payment, but you want 902 to be your default. So whatever your very first type of T code in each area, it's the default. It will automatically be the default on the fee screen. It will be the default on the payment screen. It will be default whatever type it is. So,
and for many clients, they want that default fee transaction to be blank, perhaps. So, you know, maybe somebody years ago put in office conference with, and maybe that's a very few percentage of the transactions that are under that, so it makes sense to reorganize that default. Same with category. I like to see people create the lowest category with uncategorized. That because when you set up a new client, it defaults to category 1. And if you set that up to be probate and you forget to change it for a couple cases that you set up, those cases have defaulted to probate. So if you instead set it up as uncategorized, then it's going to become obvious to you later on when these things show up in uncategorized that that happened, and you're not going to have quite as much confusion in sorting out that mess. Now, you can also renumber a client. So if you had a situation where somebody set up a new matter for an existing client, but they gave it a new client number, this would solve that. Let's say you had client 100 was Lincoln Consolidated Insurance Company. And so somebody set up 998.00 to be a new case for Lincoln Consolidated, forgetting that they should have set it up as 100.2718 or whatever the next matter number is. This will simply fix that. So you take that 100, that 998.00 and renumber it to 100 point whatever I said, and it takes all those fees and costs and anything that's been accumulated and changes that number, because of course you want all your clients to have their multiple matters tied to their client number. Now, there are other things that show up in here, and I'm going to explain a couple things. First off, it's kind of weird that under renumber you have rename contact, because that does not mean renumbering, but it's kind of the same concept. You're changing the key ID. So if you put somebody in as Paul Edward Purdue and you spelled it like the chicken, not the school, and then later you need to change it to the school because that's how my name is spelled, you would have to use rename contact to change that. Now, this, I'm just going to tell you, you do not mess with. This defines how many decimal places are to the right of the client to the decimal, and therefore how many matters. If you need to change this, there are a lot of things that you need to think about. So don't do it unless A, you know what you're doing, or B, you've checked with somebody and they've told you to do this, okay? Just be very careful. I'm not going to get into this because this doesn't really have anything to do with renumbering. But I do want to warn you that when you go into maintenance renumber, don't accidentally go in here and do anything and say, okay, because you would be creating havoc to do so. Now, there are other places where you can renumber. If you go into General Ledger, you can renumber your chart of accounts. And there may be a time when you need to change an account number because it makes sense. If you got set up wrong or you're changing the way your chart is structured. Again, don't do this. It's like changing the key length and client ID in the Tabs system. This would change your account number format. But you can renumber an account. And also in accounts payable, you can renumber a vendor. Sometimes you might have several different vendors that you have multiple vendor accounts for. I've seen that before. So you'll have a 100.00 is UPS and 100.01 is a special type of UPS that kind of the same vendor. You want to keep it together, but it's really you pay a different company. So in here, we can renumber a vendor. Another reason to renumber a vendor, kind of like the reason that you'd renumber a timekeeper, you want to transfer the invoices first, but if you make the mistake of setting up a vendor twice, this won't merge things like renumbering a timekeeper will, but there is a move vendor routine somewhere here under utilities, and so you may want to merge a vendor together, and as long as you've transferred the invoices first, you can just change that one vendor to another. And finally, if we go into the trust accounting software, there's a place to renumber a trust account in here. And since I am in change key length, hold on, I left myself in this place I told you never to go, and it won't let me into trust renumber until I get out, or trust at all until I get out of there. So here we go. Now we're going back into trust accounting, maybe. And the other thing that you might want to do is renumber a trust account, but be careful. Let me explain. First off, the only time you could ever renumber a trust account or attorney, you can rename a payee, you can rename a contact in here, but the only time you'd ever want to renumber a trust account in trust accounting software is if you don't have tabs, which is going to be very, very unusual. Why? Because the trust account number corresponds with the client number. So if Paul Purdue is client number 101.01 in tabs, he's going to be trust account number 101.01 in trust accounting. And if you try to go in here when you have tabs and renumber a trust account, it's going to tell you, if I can type, that's odd. Yeah. And new, if I change this to, let's say, 0.01, and we go to renumber, give it a bank account. To change the trust ID, the client must be renumbered in tabs. So it's not going to let you do that. Now, don't get confused. If you have Paul Purdue as client 101 and Mary Jo Boyd is client number 102, and you go into trust to set up Mary Jo Boyd's trust account and you mistakenly set it up as 101, changing that trust account from 101 to 102 won't work. What you're doing there is you're changing Paul Purdue to Mary Jo Boyd as far as a client goes. You would have to manually take those trust transactions out of the old place and put them in the new place. You are not really changing the trust ID. You're changing the client ID. So don't get confused and think that if you set the trust up as the wrong person, that you can change it here. You would be changing the client ID. You need to manually move those transactions out of the wrong account and create the new account, the right one, and move them into there. And Mary Jo's poised over her mute button, and she's got something to add to this.
Well, I was waiting to see if he would do it, and he didn't, because here is the reason that you do want to do the renumber trust. Because
I knew that. I just wanted to give you an opportunity.
Let's say that you set up 100.00 with bank account number 1, and you really had another trust account, and 100.00 should have been bank account number 2. This is where renumbering a trust account can work for you. You're not changing the trust account ID, you're changing the bank account and renumbering it, and this is where you could go in and you could hit renumber and it would work. So.
Exactly. Very good point. Okay, and that's all I have to talk about with regard to renumbering. Now next month we're going to talk about the client and timekeeper realization reports. That'll be, you guessed it, Mary Jo, who's continuing her run through the reports. And I'm going to talk about payment allocation, not the report, but how it happens and when it happens and how you might even have some control over how it's allocated. So next month, client and timekeeper realization and payment allocation. Remember, version 15, if you've got it, you've got to do something before it goes off support. Well, no, you don't. You could just not get any support. You could get into a situation where you have to pay STI to convert your data, but I recommend you not do that. And as I always do at the end, I'm going to talk about where to find all this information in case you happen to miss that next month virtual user group meeting. And Mary Jo, I'm going to have you type ATT in there because I think my little, just type ATT and hit enter. If we go here, this is our website. This is our new website, everybody. Be sure to tell us how much you like it. We now have the ability to search. So if I wanted to find information on, let's say, emailing statements, well, I'm not going to type it because my keyboard doesn't work. But as I type email and hit enter, it actually brings up posts right away as I'm typing, just like Google would. And if I hit enter, then it takes me to a list, and I can search for things that way. You also have all of our videos here. And so if you want to find what the next Tabs 3 virtual user group meeting is going to be about, All you do is click here, and there it is. It's already up. The February 23 Tabs 3 Virtual User Group meeting, as we said, is going to be about payment allocation and client and timekeeper realization. And if we go down here, we will see the recorded versions of everything that we've done. The one that we've just done is going to be there starting today, actually. We didn't start doing this till today. Is going to be there with a note that says it's coming soon, currently in post-production. So that's actually the one that we're attending right now. So you can go see all of our videos. You can register for our live events, which would be the user group meetings or the coffee pot webinars. You can also see the pre-recorded videos, Mary Jo's eBite video series, and the Paul and Mary Jo show, which we recorded 2 of today. So be sure to take advantage of all that. Everybody have a good rest of the day, rest of the week, and of course rest of the month, because we will see you in February when we talk about client and timekeeper realization and payment allocation. Thanks much. Bye-bye.